I'll make the announcement. I'll let them know. Hey, Kip. 1 second. Hello, good evening, everybody. Just want to let you know we're going to be starting a couple minutes after 7, just letting some more people walk in. Did want to mention that there is a red Nissan out front with the flashers on, tag number 9FA8380. Again, a red Nissan, your flashers are on. And just one last note, we do have a table that's outside for everybody where you can write questions. If there's any specific questions that you would like to ask us, we'll be answering them at the end of the event. Thank you.
So, Ted, we're going to do an invocation. Is this the group? Okay, fine. Do you want to wait till we start? Oh, good. Yeah, I thought you would have had a time, because the group, but we can do that. Oh, you know, lose them.
No, whatever y'all do is fine.
I don't know.
Did you say we're going to say prayer?
Well, I thought I guess with the church, I thought the prayer in my house just to make it good, but we can do it with everybody. I told you.
That's how we start the event.
He was very reluctant to do that. He said, don't you have to tell everybody? Yeah, it's your place.
celebrate the life of our resurrected Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. The building is the Life Center. The body is known as Huber Memorial Church. You're welcome, and we're grateful for this opportunity to inform you so you can impact lives beyond our own generation. You're in place. His presence with a prayer. Now, we have a school called Hope Academy, and we teach our youngsters, you don't have to pray long, but you do have to pray strong. Let's pray. Father, we invite and invoke your presence. Magnify yourself in this place. Use us as instruments in your hands. Prepare us for the warfare that must take place. Bless us to be good sons and daughters, good stewards, and good soldiers. In Jesus' name, can we together say amen? Amen, amen, amen.
The Reproductive Freedom Amendment is not what you think. Reproductive freedom is not limited to pregnancy decisions. Children need parental permission to receive over-the-counter medication when in school. Children need parental permission for tattoos and piercings. The Reproductive Freedom Amendment creates a new right for all individuals, regardless of age. Children will be able to permanently alter their bodies without parental consent or knowledge. Hands off our kids. Vote no to question 1.
Good evening, and thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight to our second Parental Power Summit. My name is Darren Badio. I was born and raised here in Baltimore, Maryland. My father and brother both were deported for selling drugs. That's the environment that I grew up in. My senior year of high school, that's when things changed for me. I remember seeing my mom crying at the kitchen table, crying and saying how we had $3,000 worth of bills, but she only had $1,000 to her name. At that night, I didn't understand that we struggled, but I knew that I had to do something with myself, and I decided that I was going to graduate high school and go to college. I did graduate high school, and I went to college. And when I went to college, I made a commitment that no matter how hard it got, that I would graduate. My mom dropped me off at college with $20. I remember getting my first job as a waiter. I never waited before. So the owner said, yeah, I can hire. Can you start now? I'm like, yes. So the first table, I remember grabbing the tray and I dropped it on all the customers. My second customer, they ordered fajitas. And I remember grabbing the fajita tray. And as soon as I went to grab it, everybody's like, no, because it didn't have the warmer on it. It burned my hand. I stuck my hand in the ice. But you know what? Again, I made a commitment that no matter how hard it got, that I would graduate and I would be somebody. There were many times when I was in college, I didn't eat dinner. Multiple times, I even had to eat trash out of a trash can, eat my roommate's leftovers. But again, I made a commitment that no matter how things got, that I was going to be somebody. Education saved my life. It opened up doors and allowed me to provide for my family. God is doing amazing things in my life. We're not giving that same opportunity to our children, and that's why I'm here today. Currently, I'm a deacon at Rosedale Baptist Church. I was the director of operations for our at-risk youth mentorship program for the past 5 years, where we have 120 plus kids come every Friday night. We provide them a safe environment and share the word with them and encourage them. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Baltimore County Parent and Student Coalition, and I even ran for public office. I started to advocate for our children when they closed down our schools during COVID. Do you remember? Do you remember that we had to go to the restaurant with the mask on, walk to the seat, we can take it off? Do you remember when they closed the churches and the schools, but left open the bars and the strip clubs? One thing being from Baltimore is that we can smell BS a mile away. And something didn't smell right. Now we learned that the mask and the social distancing were made up by Dr. Fauci. It didn't do nothing. And I'm here today because something still don't smell right. And I'm concerned about our children, their education, and the learning environment. My heart hurts. And I'm here to sound the alarm that we have major issues in our schools, in our nation, but specifically here in Baltimore County. A Board of Education member posted this week on social media, "We need to stop saying that only 30% of our kids are reading proficiently. We need to be saying 70% of our kids don't know how to read." That's what concerns me as a dad of 2 children. I have 1 child who attends BCPS, and I just don't understand how we can talk about pronouns when we have kids that can't read. We need to bring the focus back to educating our children and let us parents raise our children the way we want to at home. It's not the school's job to talk to our children about sex or sexuality. Here in Baltimore County, since the start of this year, we are losing 3 to 4 teachers every week. Why are the teachers leaving? I'll tell you, because they don't feel supported by their principals, they don't feel respected by the students, and we are not holding children accountable. We hear of gangs in our schools, and they are targeting our youngest children because of the laws that are being passed that we don't hold these young children accountable. I hope that tonight you are motivated to share the information you learned, encouraged to join the fight, and I pray that you go out and vote early or on November 5th and say no to question 1. Thank you. Who I have coming up speaking first is going to be Kit Hart from Moms for Liberty in Carroll County.
Thank you all. It is so nice to be here. My name is Kit, and I am the chapter chair of the Carroll County chapter of Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty is dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend our parental rights at all levels of government. Why? Because we are at a point in our wonderful nation's history where we're seeing our parental rights, which are fundamental. They were given to us by God and cannot be taken away. And we're seeing them being stripped away. Our movement was founded at right around that same time during COVID, when our children were forced to, quote unquote, learn behind a Zoom screen, behind a computer screen. They were taken out of their schools. They were denied educational access because the teachers' unions decided that the wants of adults and the feelings of adults were more of a priority than the needs of children. And when in a nation's history have we ever prioritized adults over children? So our movement was founded. And I have to say, since that time, it's only gotten worse. We are seeing so many examples just here in Maryland where I could tell you story after story. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of how we're seeing our fundamental rights as parents being stripped away. Just this year, really early on into the year, I had a parent call me, and she was very distressed. She is the parent of 2 daughters, and her younger daughter is 11 years old in 6th grade. The very first week of school, her daughter comes home crying, sobbing off the bus, and says, "Mom, you're not going to believe what happened." She was in gym class, and the gym teacher said, "Okay, we're going to take a tour of the facilities to understand what happens in the locker room when you have to get changed out of your clothing to get into your gym clothing." Well, they all sit down in the locker room, and her daughter, 11 years old, looks to her right and sees a boy, a male, in the girls' locker room. The girl was very distraught and raised her hand and said, "Is this supposed to be for boys and girls or just girls?" And the teacher said, "Everybody here is welcome because everybody here identifies as a girl." The parents, the mom, of course, was very distraught. She started calling everyone she knew. Parents were enraged. They called the principal, and guess what? Lo and behold, the policy at this school and at all of your children's schools and grandchildren's schools, the policy in the state of Maryland is that the child can access whatever bathroom that they want in their schools. This refers to bathrooms, this refers to locker rooms when kids are getting changed for sports, and this refers to cabins and overnight field trips. And you will not know before your kid goes to an overnight field trip who they are being roomed with. That is the policy, and it was snuck in years ago because parents were asleep at the wheel and weren't attending school board meetings. They didn't know what their school board was talking about. They didn't know the policies that were happening. And so that is the policy, and that's in place to stay. That's going to happen time and time again until parents get off the couch and start demanding that this policy changes in the state of Maryland. Even more disturbingly, recently, a child in Prince George's County, PG County, Maryland, very upsetting story. He had broken up with his girlfriend. He was 15 years old, and was very distraught. Come to find out, this child has autism, was taking things very, very deeply, and started having suicidal ideations. Parents were very upset. So they took him to a counselor. The counselor suggested that they take him to the hospital because of the suicidal ideations. Well, at the hospital, the child was told by the doctors and convinced by the doctors and the nurses that maybe he was actually a girl. And the reasons why he was having so much distress is that he was actually a girl. So there at the hospital, he started identifying as transgender. The parents were told that he could not return to the home because they would not affirm his fake gender. These are Christian parents. They want the best for their children. They had been in military service forever. All they wanted was for their children to get better, for their child to get better, and they were not allowed access to their child. Eventually, the child was able to leave the hospital, and it only gets worse. CPS arrives at the family's house and says, we need to take that child. They actually said to him, because he was not wanting to go with CPS, he wanted to stay with his family, and the social worker said to him that they needed to take him to a safe place separate from his parents. They were telling him that his parents are dangerous and they are the safe people. These are the kinds of infringes and horrible ways that they are trying to take away our parental rights. These children, your children, were given to you by God. They are your children. You direct the education, upbringing, medical decisions, and well-being of your children. CPS, the schools, they do not do that. That is not their job, and they need to stay in their lanes. So I'm going to challenge each one of you here tonight. If you haven't already, please start attending your school board meetings. They're every month. You can look up whatever county you're in, you can look up on your calendar where your school board meetings are. It is so important for parents to show up and show that you care, that you really want to have a say in your child's education. Attend your school board meetings. Get involved for Moms for Liberty. We have a vast array of resources available to you. If you know of somebody who would be interested in running for political office, that's the best place to start. Encourage them to run for school boards. We need to fill the school boards with parents who care about their children. So please, get involved, and thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Kit. And next we have up Deborah Brocada with Health Not Harm Maryland.
Okay, George, do you want to play the first video? Let's see.
The Reproductive Freedom Amendment is not what you think. Reproductive freedom is not limited to pregnancy decisions. Children need parental permission to receive over-the-counter medication when in school. Children need parental permission for tattoos and piercings. The Reproductive Freedom Amendment creates a new right for all individuals, regardless of age. Children will be able to permanently alter their bodies without parental consent or knowledge. Hands off our kids. Vote no to question 1.
Thanks, George. I'm I'm Deborah Badio. My husband and I were born and raised in Maryland, and we have raised our 4 daughters here in Harford County. I am a retired ICU nurse. I also volunteered at a crisis pregnancy center for over 8 years. I've been advocating for good health care and family issues and child issues for about 30 years, and I've been lobbying down in Annapolis for about 5 or so years. And then I learned about this amendment because this is one of the laws that I lobbied against down in Annapolis, and when they passed it, I knew I needed to do something, and there were other people that also felt the same way, and we formed this coalition called Health Not Harm MD. In Maryland, it is required by law that if you're going to raise money to support or oppose a ballot initiative, you must register as a ballot issue committee. So that's what we did to fight this deceptive reproductive freedom amendment. I want to say Darren's story is very good, and it points out that one of the best barometers for how children do in life is parental involvement. So Darren had a mother who was involved in his life, and he decided to make something of himself. This amendment is a nail in the coffin for parental rights. They were hoping, the supporters and sponsors of this amendment were hoping that everyone would think this is simply an abortion amendment, and that's how they would pass it, and they wouldn't know that they were going to vote away their parental rights. The reason they thought this is because in Maryland, 70 to 80% of Marylanders do think abortion should remain legal. And they've been training Marylanders and voters across the country to identify reproductive freedom as only meaning abortion, but that is not the case. And if you didn't know about this amendment, that's by design. They were hoping that people would only see it for the first time when they filled out their ballots and would see it, and then they'd see the words reproductive freedom and they'd think, oh, that's the abortion amendment, I'm for that. There's a lot of other things that the General Assembly has been doing as well that you're not aware of. And I'll start with, for instance, abortion through birth is legal in Maryland and has been since 1992. In 1991, we can start with the slides and go straight to the first one, the Maryland Freedom of Choice Act of 1991. So we can go to the next one. So this is the law. The state may not interfere with the decision of a woman to terminate a pregnancy before the fetus is viable or at any time during the woman's pregnancy if the termination procedure is necessary to protect the life or health of the woman, and the state may not abridge that right. So there was deception back then when this was passed. This was passed in 1991 to make abortion through birth legal, but most Marylanders, when they voted on this, and they voted to pass it, keep it as law in the 1992 referendum by 62%, they thought they were only voting for an abortion law that supported abortion for the first 3 months because of that language before the fetus is viable. But when they added the life or health of the mother as part of it, that is what made abortion through birth legal in Maryland. It's just that most voters assumed when you say life or health of the mother that there's some catastrophic incident that would have occurred that would have required an abortion to save the mother's life. So they didn't know. They really thought, and many Marylanders thought, it was only legal for the first 3 months. The other thing that Marylanders didn't know is this law left it up to the abortion provider to decide whether or not to notify parents of a minor girl coming in for an abortion. So most people did not know that, might not know that now. A minor girl can go in and get an abortion without her parents' knowledge or consent. So a 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl can go and do that. And it certainly seems like the parents should know, one, that their child is pregnant, but also what were the circumstances around her becoming pregnant in case, well, at that age it shouldn't be happening. So that was one of the chipping away of parental rights that most people have not been aware of. But at least with this law, it was required that a physician do the abortion. The next thing that came along, next slide please, is the Mental Health Access Initiative of 2021, and I'm sure you all don't know about this. This law essentially changed or lowered the age of a child to seek mental health care from age 16 to age 12 without parental consent or knowledge. That age is not a random age. 12 is the age at which most children start puberty, so it's already laying the groundwork. The other thing that's deceptive about this law is they don't even specify the type of mental health care provider the child sees. They don't say, oh, it has to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist psychologist or a sociologist. They don't even specify. They just use this very broad term, healthcare provider. And then they say a 12-year-old has the mental capacity to seek mental health care, but then in this law they say that the healthcare provider might not want to tell the parents anyway if it deters the minor child from seeking this health care. So they seem like they only want one pathway for this. Again, so this is another way to chip away at parents' rights, and Medicaid would cover this. This is how they would get around the parents. The parents don't need to find out because they'll just let Medicaid cover it. Next slide, please. The Abortion Care Access Act of 2022, it's all in the title, access. They decided they needed more people to do abortions. There weren't enough physicians who wanted to do them, so they decided that, okay, well, let's take away the physician requirement, and we'll have somebody called a qualified provider who can do abortions. In this law, they didn't even specify the type of training that would be required or even if that person would have a medical background. And again, in this law, Medicaid must pay for all abortions and all private health insurance providers must cover abortions without co-pays or cost sharing or deductibles. So every single one of us in Maryland is paying for abortions, and not only for Maryland residents, but for anyone who comes into the state of Maryland to have an abortion. Again, parental notification is left up to the abortion provider, who now may or may not be a doctor. Now think about that. Young girls or anyone who goes to an abortion clinic, if they see someone in a white coat, usually they're going to assume that's a doctor. They're not going to think to ask, are you a doctor? What are your qualifications for doing this invasive surgical procedure that has risks up to and including death? So we all associate a white coat with a doctor. There's a white coat ceremony in med school. It's very prestigious to get that. So this is another deception. They also included in this law an automatic $3.5 million to be included in the Maryland budget every single year just to provide training for abortions. So this chipping away, again, now it isn't a physician who's necessarily usurping the parent's authority. It's now some qualified provider. Okay, next slide. 2023, we have the Trans Health Equity Act. The General Assembly felt that it was important not to have any discrimination for all the drugs and surgeries necessary for what they call gender-affirming care. You and I know it's really gender-destroying care. And they included puberty blockers. Why is that important? Because adults do not need puberty blockers. We've all already gone through puberty. We don't need puberty blockers. So we know it was targeting children, and when some legislators tried to put language in there to exclude minors, it was rejected. So again, and they also require Medicaid to pay for these drugs and surgeries. So here we are again, going after children, at least for the puberty blockers by this law, they would be able to get it. So now we're up to the constitutional amendment. This really is the nail in the coffin for parental rights in Maryland, and this is really a con job. They are really trying to convince Marylanders that this is about women's rights. They're going to be taken away, but we're going to protect your reproductive freedom. What's really under attack are the parents, the family. That's what's under attack. So here is what the actual amendment will say that would go into our Constitution if this is passed. That every person, as a central component of an individual's right to liberty and equality, has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including but not limited to the ability to make and effectuate decisions to prevent, continue, or end one's own pregnancy, and the state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge that right. Now, I do want to show you something. This is the law that was passed to make abortion through birth legal. It's 7 pages long. It has definitions in it. It uses the word woman. It uses the word abortion. And it says when we say this, we mean that. They wanted to make it really clear that women could obtain abortions in Maryland. So it was 7 pages long. The law to put this amendment on the ballot is less than 2 pages. So it's really more about what's not in it. It's deliberately broad. And Senator Dawn Guile admitted that the language was deliberately broad so they could apply it to many issues from now and in the future. So what's not in it? There are no minimum age limits in this amendment. There are no parental consent requirements in this amendment. They do not define reproductive freedom. As a matter of fact, reproductive freedom is not defined in the law, not in the amendment, and not anywhere in Maryland law. It is an umbrella term to refer to any treatment that pertains to the reproductive system or the anatomy. Also, persons and individuals, they can be adults, children, male or female. Again, that very important thing is that every person. It doesn't say every adult person. It doesn't say every person over the age of 18. It doesn't even say every person in Maryland. So it's all about what's not in there and what they'll use it for in the future. If they wanted to exclude minors, if the legislators wanted to exclude minors, they would have. And there were legislators who tried to add language, to put minimum age limits, to put parental consent requirements, and they were voted down. So we know that this was deliberate. It was not an accident that they did that. So there's that deception. The next deception is the ballot itself. When voters see the ballot, they're not going to see the actual amendment. They're going to see this sort of summary of it, which says, the proposed amendment confirms an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including but not limited to, and then all the decisions around pregnancy. So they leave out that every person. I think they realize that some of the voters might realize it doesn't say that every woman. It says, so they just said the individual, and again, they're training you to think about reproductive freedom as abortion. Then they're claiming that this is confirming a right. There is no existing right to reproductive freedom. This amendment is creating a brand new right for all individuals regardless of age. So this is for children as well as adults. So that there was a senator, Senator Justin Reedy, tried to require it in the law that the amendment would be on the ballot as well, because he said, if we're asking Marylanders to amend the Maryland Constitution, that's a big deal. They should know exactly what the amendment says. And the other legislators said, nope, that's okay, we don't need to do that, because they really wanted this to pass. All right, so we'll go to the next slide. The words really do matter. These amendments and laws are written by lawyers and other legislators, and the legislators usually direct these lawyers and tell them, we want a law that does this, and we want to make sure it passes, so they get them to write this. They know how to add this other language. And again, they didn't change the words person or individual to woman. The legislator said, let's make it about abortion if that's what you want. They didn't change it to woman. They didn't replace reproductive freedom with abortion. And again, they didn't exclude minors or require parental consent. And they wouldn't match the ballot language. Okay, the next slide. So the undefined terms are person, individual, reproductive freedom, reproductive liberty, and reproductive autonomy. Those are the things you'll see used back and forth. And the next slide, I point out the marijuana amendment because it shows very clearly that the legislators do know how to put parameters on individuals. They asked, do you favor the legalization of the use of cannabis by an individual who is at least 21 years of age? So they know how to do that. They chose 21 years of age. Why? Because you can't buy alcohol until you're 21 in Maryland. And we have a board back there that shows all the other things children cannot do. They can't buy alcohol, they can't buy cigarettes, they can't buy marijuana until they're 21. And some other things that children can't do without parental consent, they can't go to school and take over-the-counter medications or even their prescription medications like inhalers without written parental permission. They can't go on a field trip and they can't participate in a sports team without written parental permission. They cannot even get tattoos or piercings without parental consent, and those things are reversible. But here, they want children to be able to consent to drugs and surgeries that will permanently alter their bodies without parental consent. That's what this is about. So, next slide. This is not just a Maryland issue. This is a nationwide agenda. Similar amendments have already passed in California, Michigan, Ohio, and Vermont, and other states will have a similar amendment to this one on their ballots. This is a nationwide agenda to strip parents of their rights. They want to take over your children. This is also big money. You wonder why? It's a billion-dollar business. Planned Parenthood, yes, they do abortion, but they're already dispensing puberty blockers and cross hormones, and some of the clinics have already started doing the gender surgeries because it is big money. It is a billion-dollar business. And if you get somebody on this pathway of transitioning, they are medicalized for life. So Big Pharma makes out because they have a lifelong customer, because those people have to take cross hormones. And then the surgeons also have a pretty perpetual customer, because the person who is suffering with gender dysphoria also wants to keep getting surgeries to make their body match what they think it should look like. So this is a lot about money. And they're pushing this, again, across the country. And we're already seeing what's happening. And Kit talked about one story of the parents who lost their autistic son to this gender ideology. In California, it's a sanctuary state. If minors want to get these drugs and surgeries and their parents aren't okay with it, they can go to California. And California will not return these children to their parents. Tim Walz signed an executive order for Minnesota to do the same thing, to make Minnesota a sanctuary state for minors. So another adult, a random adult, could take your child to another state and get this done, and they won't give the children back to the state. If this amendment passes in Maryland, we'll be a sanctuary state for minors for the same thing, and we'll all be paying for it, for children to have their bodies mutilated. So the other thing that making this a right does is it decreases the quality and safety of medical care, because once it's a right, if you start imposing safety protocols or things to try and protect the patients, the other side who wants to get this done will claim that you are trying to block this person's ability to exercise their right to this new right. And Maryland even passed what's known as SHIELD laws. They made it sound like they were trying to protect the privacy of the patient. They're really protecting the businesses from having to release their records when harm is done. So, and what Kit was talking about, the guidelines in the school and why schools are keeping secrets from parents, this is what it is. It's the Guidelines for Gender Identity Non-Discrimination, and it came about in 2015. And they didn't ask parents outside of the LGBT community what their input would be for these guidelines. So I feel like it was deliberate for them not to know about it. And these guidelines, which are not law, but they are treated that way, encourage school personnel to defer to children on whether or not to tell parents private things about themselves. So somehow they go to the child, and the school can know private things about the children, but their own parents can't know. There are some schools in Maryland that have changing rooms for children. So they can leave the house dressed one way, go to school, change into some other clothing, and identify as something else in school, and then change back before they go home, and the school does not have to tell the parents. So that's how this is happening and how it can happen, that children can be secretly transitioned to the opposite sex. If you go to our website, healthnotharmmd.org, there's a California mom who talks about how a teacher took advantage of a lot of family tragedy and was secretly transitioning her 11-year-old daughter. The other thing that's been going on, if you wonder why so many children are identifying as trans, this is the curriculum, Maryland Comprehensive Health Education Framework, pre-kindergarten through high school. So while we have falling test scores in Maryland and kids graduating without proficiency in math and English, they're teaching garbage. This is a radical sexual curriculum. It also talks about other things like suicide, which when did these people become experts in all of this? So this is beginning as early as pre-K and kindergarten. They start talking about gender identity and gender expression, and then they move on to asking these kids if they're a boy or a girl, and so on and so on. So this is what's going on in our school. It gets much worse, and I would urge you to vote no, find out more about this, tell everyone you know to vote no on question 1. This is really about the true crux of this amendment is going after our children, giving them the same rights as adults to make changes in their bodies. And we don't want that. One thing we have all in common, it's unifying, whether you are Republican, Democrat, Independent, pro-life or pro-choice. We all can agree that parents should have the authority in their children's lives for health care and education decisions. So vote no on question 1 and tell everyone you know. And please help us out at the polls. Go work it. We have handouts that you can give to people as they go in. Hopefully that will sow enough doubt that people will vote no on question 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. And again, vote no on question 1. Our next speaker, we have Ishmail Royer with Religious Freedom Institute.
Thank you, Darren. I begin in the name of God, the most merciful. And I want to say to each and every one of you, thank you for coming out, and very grateful to you for sharing your time with us and for learning more about how to protect your children. As Darren mentioned, I work at the Religious Freedom Institute. We're a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. that fights for religious freedom for everyone. And it's interesting that I, as a parent of 6 beautiful children, I'm out in D.C. working in policy and, sort of high-level things without thinking so much about how they are impacting my actual family. But one day I noticed that my son, who was 14 at the time, started coming. He was a student at Fairfax County Public Schools. And I'm not going to mention which school that was. I'm trying to preserve his anonymity. But he came to me and he started asking me, Baba, he said, do we really need to believe in God to be a good person? And I said, well, that's a really, really good question. And, I'm trying to explain as best I can, to him, no, you can be a good person without believing in God. But, and I'm kind of struggling. That's a pretty deep question to ask. And later he began to ask me other questions related to, just indicating that he was having doubts that God existed at all. And, I wasn't really prepared for those kind of things as a father, but I'm doing my best with it, And then he began to talk to me about sexuality and, being attracted to other boys and being in love with a certain boy and, this sort of thing. And I'm trying to explain to him, well, son, you're young, you're 14, and, we can have very deep, feelings of friendship and so on for people of, for other boys, but this isn't something that is necessarily like sexual. And I'm trying to, these questions are really, I'm reeling inside, but I'm trying to be respectful and and loving and empathetic and trying not to drive him away. And in doing all this, I came to find, and he was at the same time, he was really into theater. I loved theater, and I think I respect theater a lot. I think it's a great creative outlet, and he was really good at it. And he had a teacher that he really liked, and I went to the teacher one time to discuss with her about my son's failing grades in other classes, but he was doing really well in this class. So I wanted to talk to her about, that maybe she could encourage him to take his other classes more seriously, and she refused to meet with me. When I went to meet her, she looked at me with a very hostile look, and she just kept turning her face away from me and wouldn't meet with me. And it was the most bizarre thing. I'm thinking, am I out of line here? Am I crazy? Did I say something wrong? Am I approaching this in the wrong way? I saw her later when my son was doing at a county fair. He was doing some improv with his class, and I was doing really a great job up there with the other kids. And I saw the teacher there, and I went to try to approach her and talk to her and just try to clear the air and lighten things up a little bit because of the last weird, awkward encounter that we had, and she turned her back on me. And I kept trying to talk to her, and I'm like, is this woman actually turning her back? She turning her back on me. And I'm trying not to judge the fact that she's, looks probably maybe only about 5 years older than my son. She looked like she just graduated from high school, and she's got the blue hair, and, trying not to judge a book by its cover, because I myself had blue hair when I was a kid, But no, she was really deeply hostile to me. And talking to my son a little bit more, I came to find that she had been meeting with him a lot after school and talking with him about his sexuality, talking with him about whether God exists or not, and talking with him about me and my wife, his mother, and talking to her and telling my son that your parents are fundamentalists. They don't have your best interests at heart. I have your best interests at heart. I know what's good for you. I'm your friend. You need to do what feels good to you. And she was planting these ideas. She was the one that was putting into his mind about not needing to believe in God. And his mother and I were outraged, really outraged. And we, when I, delved a little deeper in talking with him about it and came to learn that this was all coming from her. And, and we demanded to have a meeting with the principal, the assistant principal, the counselor, the teacher herself, my son, and my wife, and we all met. And she began crying, burst into tears when his mother and I explained our, why we had a problem with her discussing things that she had no business. This has nothing to do with theater. This is not your place to discuss religion and sexuality and so on with my son. That's our place as parents. And she burst into tears, felt like why am I under attack? Ran out of the room. The counselor and the assistant principal were very stern with me and my wife about how we had handled this whole thing, and we were out of line. I mean, this is how they behaved, as if we had done something wrong. And we never actually resolved this situation. He continued to be in the class with her. He continued to have these meetings with her. He graduated. And to this day, we have a very good relationship, a loving relationship, because I managed to handle it in a way that didn't push him away. But we still struggle with those very issues that she encouraged in him. We still struggle with maintaining a good relationship with him while trying to show that, okay, we don't approve of some of the things that you are thinking and believing, but you will never stop being our son who we love, and who is part of our family. Nothing can ever change that, and we would, die for you. We would die for you. And so what I want to leave you with here is that there's an attitude in public schools that the teachers are playing a role in raising children that trumps or that supersedes, or that is greater than the role of parents, or at least has some share in raising your children. This is an attitude among many people in education. It's an attitude in policy and among many legislators, and it's finding its way into law. So this is not some theoretical thing I learned. I work in D.C., I work in politics. This is not some theoretical thing. This is something that is potentially affecting every one of us, and that we have to be cognizant and aware. I don't mean, keep your kids out of things that they like, but what I do mean is pay attention to what's going on with your kid, and especially in public school, and especially look for alternatives to public school if you can find them. I thank you again all so much, and I pray for you and your families. And there's I'm a Muslim and you're Christians, but we have so much in common and many things. And one of those things is that we in our religion is taught. It teaches us save yourselves and your families from the hellfire. This is our obligation, to save our children and to protect them, and that's what I'm here to encourage everyone to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishmael. And next we have Pastor Blaine Cuban from New Life Sanctuary.
Good evening. I would like to really just speak some words of wisdom, hopefully that we can see a perspective that's been placed before us, because a perspective can change everything. How we view things and how we envision things. There's actually a scripture in the Bible that says, without a vision, my people perish. And we have to be in an alignment to come together, become one. Because if we're scattered or we're separated, we become weak. We should be outraged over these matters. We should be infuriated over what has taken place in our community. And this isn't just something that we're talking about that might happen in the future. This is a fact. It's happening right before our eyes. We're a generation right now that we've seen changes, and many of us are sitting here today already outraged because we can see the change of society has led us to this place right now where these issues are being brought before us. As a younger man, I would never dream that this would actually be an issue. I in my thinking, have never thought that, you know, people would actually look at something that is blatant and then call it something different than what it really is. It's almost like we've become detached from reality. And what's happening right now, the family unit is being challenged. It's being compromised. There are people out there right now that are in political positions that are making rules and regulations, and not only just affecting children, it's affecting the people of the land. Even the Bible says the day would come that men would even call those things which are good, they're going to call it evil. And the things that are actually evil, they're going to refer and call it good. The voice that cries the loudest is the one that's heard the most. And I challenge you today because we need to be a voice, and we need to cry aloud and spare not. You're in a battle every day of your life when you wake up, because society and the rules and the regulations that are placed upon you is things that is being determined by people in political positions. You know, if you look at the language of these bills when they're written, they'll say a counselor has the right to determine in their own discretion how they feel concerning your young child or your grandchildren. And most of these people are humans. In fact, men alone don't even have the qualification to understand the human mind, let alone to make a decision to tell a child that you're a boy or a girl. And this is ridiculous. We're at a place right now that you know, these issues that are before us are an atrocity. And I know people get offended over this language, but it's truth. It's truth. If you're born with a Y chromosome, you're a boy. If you're born with an X chromosome, you're a girl. And you can paint it any way you want. You can put makeup on and put on a dress, but that's who you are. Now, people have a right to identify the way they want. But what's happening here, the atrocity is they're placed this on other people to force them to recognize what they believe is truth. Because perspective is only an individual right. And as oftentimes when we come before many people, and of course no two people think alike, people have different opinions. And we live in a free world. But what is freedom? Freedom is when your liberties are taken away from you. Freedom is when other people make decisions for you and block you from making choices that is your inalienable rights. And I know this ballot, as it comes up, we're less than 2 weeks now, and I know the main interest is going to be, most people are going to look at this and say that they're going to see it as a woman's right to make a decision about her own body. But this has nothing to do with that. Because actually the truth is, if this is passed, you're going to lose more of your rights. Your children are going to lose more of your rights. And you're going to give permission to people that are in many places not even qualified to make these choices and decisions. We need to speak, we need to cry out, and we need to tell everyone. I was researching the statistics on this, but a lot of people don't even know this, but actually 100 million people in the United States right now aren't even registered to vote. And did you know that 20 million Christian believers aren't registered to vote? 20 million. You know, 20 million can turn things around. Now, we're not here to promote Christianity, even though I'm a pastor and I preach it. We're here to promote justice. We're here to promote righteousness. Righteousness is just doing the right thing. So we're living in a time right now that the people that don't do anything sit on the sidelines and watch these things happen. And usually those are the people that complain the most because they don't like what's going on in our country. You know, the reason why things are the way they are is because good people do nothing. Good people do nothing. You know, when you see crime around us, you know, the moral fiber of the society is based upon the relationship of the family unit. If mothers and fathers take their rightful place as parents to sow into their children, to teach them, to love them, to nurture them, you'll see that there's less issues of crime. And when you teach people, when you spend time with them, you invest people's lives, and they feel and know that you care. It makes a difference. And right now, if we do nothing and we sit by the sidelines and just watch this happen without speaking, without crying aloud, we have to actually be like an army, because there's no demilitarized zone in this matter. We have to fight for a cause. And that's what you do when you're in a battle, because you're in a war. You're a war against the voices of society, powers in high places, and people that make decisions over us. You have a choice. You have a voice, and you have a choice to make. When November 5th comes, make the right choice and vote no.
Thank you, Pastor Blaine. And next, we have Pastor Armides from Christ the King Catholic Church.
Thank you, Darren. Good evening, everyone. So good to be here with you this evening. And Pastor Smith, thank you so much for your warm hospitality in hosting this event. Before I begin, what I want to say to you this evening, I want to address a question that is no doubt on the minds of at least a couple of you. I addressed this question at the first Parental Power Summit back in June, and the question you may be asking yourself is, why would a Catholic priest be chosen to speak at an event like this on the issue of parental power? And more to the point, what would a Catholic priest have to say that would contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way? So let me tell you a little bit about myself by way of an answer to that question, if you're wondering. If you aren't aware of it, I am, through a generous dispensation by then Pope Benedict XVI, a dispensation on behalf of former Anglican priests, which I once was. I'm a Roman Catholic priest who is also a married man. My wonderful wife, Jan, and I have been married for 54 years. We're blessed to have 4 grown children, 19 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. And so here's why I'm telling you all that. I've also, along with you, got a dog in this fight. Among all the insidious things that the so-called Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment is, one of the most insidious is that it is an assault on religious liberty. Religious liberty. Why do I say that? Because whether you are here this evening and you're Protestant or Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or a person of no particular faith tradition, the simple and irrefutable truth is this: you love your children, and you want nothing but the best for them. And whether you realize it or not, that's just part of what we call the natural law. What is the natural law? The natural law is nothing more or less than the law of God written on the hearts of all men and women, intuitively and instinctively. It's things you don't have to be taught because you just know that they're true. It's like the self-evident natural law that says, do not commit murder. Everyone knows murder is grievously wrong. The natural law would also say, do not harm children by sexualizing them or by exposing them to dangerous and nonsensical ideologies that their tender young minds cannot possibly fathom or discern. Think about it. There's a reason why we don't allow 14-year-olds to vote or to buy alcohol. It's because everyone understands that their reasoning powers and their ability to make sensible decisions are not yet fully developed. And so, brothers and sisters, recognize and acknowledge this simple fact. Children are a gift from God. And as such, they come into our lives with certain rights and certain responsibilities for us as parents. Our children are not wards of the state. We are not Marxists, although many of the people behind this amendment are. We as parents have an absolute God-given right and an absolute God-given responsibility to protect them. And if ever there was a time they needed protection from the dangerous and ill-conceived initiatives of a misguided and overbearing government, it is now. Let me take this thought a step further. We as parents and grandparents have a God-given right and obligation specifically to protect the bodies, the minds, and the souls of our children and grandchildren in the face of secular governments which, left to their own designs, would destroy their bodies, minds, and souls. Now, is that a rash statement? Is it a rash statement to assert that government would destroy the bodies, minds, and souls of our children and grandchildren? How then do we explain this widespread impetus to administer puberty-blocking drugs to prepubescent children, or to sexually and permanently mutilate adolescent children with life-altering surgeries in the name of transgenderism? Or how do we explain the near-rabid move to expose children as young as 5 to pornographic books in school libraries? Or to have them attend and participate in drag queen shows at public libraries? All this is going on right now, under our noses. And so I urge you, stand up for your children and vote against the proposed amendment to Maryland's Constitution on November 5th or before. Question 1. Vote against question 1. And encourage everyone you know to do the same, because as we have already heard, it is a deceitful misnaming of a bill that will absolutely strip parents of their authority over health care decisions for their children. And let me bring my remarks to a close with this, which I shared at the first Parental Powers Summit back in June. I would suggest to you that of all the things in our lives that are worth standing up for and worth fighting for when necessary, the 3 that should be at the very top of all of our lists are the 3 F's: faith, family, and freedom. Faith, family, and freedom. These 3 transcend politics and political parties because they go to the very heart of who we are as Americans who love our God, our children, and our country. Faith, family, and freedom. Brothers and sisters, I urge you, take a stand while there is still time. Vote no on question 1. And so thanks for listening. God bless you, and may God give us the victory on November the 5th.
Thank you, Pastor. And next, we have Jonathan Alexander with Maryland Family Institute.
Well, thank you all. This is my 3rd time here at Huber Memorial, and I hope you're as encouraged as I am that there will be a 4th, there'll be a 5th time, there'll be a 6th time. I'll keep coming back as often as you have me. I'm really encouraged that you spent your time with us tonight. You've heard a lot from people that care, people that truly care about Maryland's families and their children. Thank you to Darren for starting us off about what it was like to have an incredible mother who cared and poured into his life, but also his own story of determination, how he continued to fight through. When Darren and I were sitting at the table, I caught him, and his Bible is right there reading out of Psalm chapter 56. And the passage that he had underlined in Psalm 56 says, "In God I trust. I am not afraid what man can do to me." I think of what Kit Hart shared with us from Moms for Liberty. Remember the fight that they are in for the innocence of our children while they are going through schools. These young students that are exposed to things physically in their locker rooms and bathrooms that no child should have to go through and work through on their own. But the fight that Kit Hart and Moms for Liberty are taking to the schools, and how she's encouraged us to go to the school boards and make sure our voices are heard when they're deliberating these ordinances in the counties, and making sure that if you have the call on your life to run for office, that you aren't afraid to step up. So Kit Hart's encouragement. I think of Deborah, who explained clearly through the health not harm rubric, how she explained clearly what this amendment actually does, what they've done in years past throughout the legislature from 1991 up until now, really prepping our minds for something as insidious as this amendment, and how they're even lying to us about what it is. And her treatise exposing what it is and giving us that encouragement once again to fight against it. I think of Ishmail, who has shared his story and the incredible father he is, raising his 6 children and sharing from his depths the conversations and the fight for the innocence of his son that he continues to fight. Ishmael, I want to encourage you to keep fighting for your son. Keep fighting for your son. I think of how Christ talks to us. He talks to us at the tail end of Matthew chapter 11. He says, "Come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you will find rest for your soul." Keep up that fight for your son. John 10 explains to us that the Father has given them to his son Jesus, and he says, nothing shall snatch them out of his hand. God has your child, God has your family right where he wants you. So keep up that fight. I think of Pastor Blaine, who's encouraged us to be a voice, to continue to cry out, to go out there and cry out and use your voice. That the individuals that are supposedly in charge of us in government and have been elected to office, they're not speaking from the same perspective that we are. It is the perspective of the Lord that we should use to go out and cry out and make our voice be heard. And I think of Father Ed Meeks. Father Ed Meeks, who has 19 grandchildren. Did y'all hear that? 19 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. But also couching it in a way that we can understand that this is a fight for religious liberty. That the natural law and things that are unexplainable, but that we know so well is true, that we love our children and will do anything for what's best for them. So continue to stand up for your children, and his encouragement that the 3 F's are so important, that faith, family, and freedom are so important. All these stories that you heard today and the encouragement that you know full well should demonstrate our clear opposition to question 1. We're encouraging you to vote against question 1. This question 1 really is an attempt to break up families, to break up children. It wants to make Maryland a factory for abortion and a factory for sex change surgeries on minors. You know, Marylanders love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. Marylanders love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. You know, I think of how you probably spent your day today and how you've probably spent, most every weekday or every weekend. You're dropping your kids off either at the bus stop or dropping them off at school, and picking them up in the afternoon, then shuttling them over to practice and then to music lessons, and making sure that there are meals on the table and that the energy bills are paid, and doing that cycle over and over again. And it's something that we're willing to do, and we're committed to do it because we love our families, and that's the job it takes to continue to raise our families. And that's really where Maryland families are. We're concerned with the upbringing and the nurturing of our families. That's where parents are right now. And we've come through the summer and we have this little autumn break where school starts and we're getting used to it. And then come the crazy holiday seasons where we reset and have to do it all again. But that's really where Maryland parents are. And while we're in this state of raising our families, while we have this moment of pause, the secret recesses at the State House, what they're doing is crafting amendments like this. They're taking that very basic instinct that we have to love our family and to care for our family. They're taking that basic instinct and that privilege to protect our family and trying to find ways to destroy that. You know, if you look at parental rights, as is mentioned about the natural law, you know, this question of parental rights never really came up in law. It was about 150 years after the founding of our country that the first Supreme Court decision had to address parental rights, because our founders knew that parents are the ones responsible for the upbringing of their children. There really wasn't a question. So you didn't have to go to court. You didn't have to litigate these things. It's, you know, it would be as common sense or as no-brainer as anything that was natural. It would be like taking a case to court and saying, well, the leaves are going to turn yellow and fall from trees. You know, you wouldn't have to litigate that because it's a no-brainer. It's something that was so observable. It's so natural. That's how parental rights have always been. And so if we're seeing in the last few years these things bubbling up, is because this new assault on parental rights has to try to deconstruct everything that is natural, everything that has been in law, even in our country. You know, it goes all the way back to our Christian faith. When God laid out the 10 Commandments, he put as the 5th commandment to honor your father and your mother. The parents are mentioned there in the 5th commandment, and he puts it right after he says that you shall have no other gods before me, that you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, that you shall not have any graven image, that you shall respect the Sabbath day and show reverence to him. Right after that, he says, honor your father and your mother. He puts parental rights right there in the 10 Commandments, and that's always been a part of any civilization, any community, honoring parental rights. It's been the chief cornerstone of society until recently, when government and those that think that they are in charge of our daily lives are coming in and interjecting their worldview between the responsibilities that God has given us as parents and us passing that down to their children. And they go a step further. The state is coming in now and saying, well, even if you were pregnant with a child, well, if it's not convenient for you to have it, or if the state deems it's not convenient, and there was a time where the state deemed that African-American babies weren't convenient to have. If you had a disability in the womb, it wasn't convenient to have, and so they pushed the eugenics movement. The state is saying, well, if you're not paying a value to the state, that even if that baby is in the womb, you can go ahead and discard it. The state coming in between the natural rights and the duties of parents to raise their child and putting things like unlimited abortions and now another destruction of parental rights. That's really what this amendment does. It calls, once again, for extreme, limitless abortion. It says forever we're going to treat children based on their convenience or inconvenience. And you can destroy them in the womb. If they come out of the womb, the state's going to make a determination, sometimes out of your sight, whether or not you can destroy that child's body by pumping them up with puberty blockers or going ahead and deconstructing them through surgery. And they don't try to hide it. It's really a wolf masquerading as wolf's clothing. They will tell you, if you drill down, what does this actually mean? They will demonstrate to you in the hearings that they have at the State House and the witnesses that they bring in front of you. This is exactly what they're doing. They're doing it in plain sight. And as bad as that it goes even a step further. If these children escape the death grip in the womb of abortion, it goes and attempts to consign them to a lifelong of gender transition. There's no limitation to their age. It goes and tries to convince their mind in a way where their minds aren't even fully formed and talks them into gender transition. It locks them into a doctor who, by Maryland law now, is protected from having any investigations done against him or her. That doctor basically has a carte blanche to perform whatever they want on your kid, out-of-state kids being shipped into the state and having these things performed on them, locking children forever in this life-altering decision. And what's worse, and what this summit is all about, is that first layer of protection, the protection that ought to be there to stop children from going down this track, the protection of parents. Well, the state is coming in and saying, no, there's not going to be any parental notification. There's not going to be any need for parental consent. We're going to push this agenda, and there's nothing you can do to stand in that way. Parents being eliminated from all of those conversations and from consent. You know, Marylanders are against everything that I just mentioned because the people of Maryland love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children as it forces compliance from every corner of our state. It says that no local government, no county can choose their own path. It's only what the state constitution says now. It's in an extreme, forceful manner that takes a sledgehammer to any law that seeks to come against it. It's the Constitution spreading its arms across the entire state and saying, I don't care if 10 years down the road your county wants to change its mind. It's in the Constitution now, and you cannot pass a law against it. That's how far this amendment wants to go. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children as it strips our elected representatives from making any law down the road to protect women or to protect children. It doesn't allow any protection against medical negligence or any predatory practices. It disallows any reasonable protections for life. It disallows any requirements that there be ultrasounds in an abortion clinic or that someone is presented with the image of their child before they go in and abort. There's no requirements for physicians to have admitting privileges in emergency settings. It basically makes abortion and abortion pills on demand like a vending machine where someone can punch in a number and receive these poison pills and these poison procedures to destroy their children. That's what this amendment does. And Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. It targets you, the taxpayer. It says because this is a fundamental right, and in the states that have already passed this, it says that the taxpayer is going to have to fund that. And sometimes you hear that and you say, well, that's some taxpayer over there. But those taxpayers are you and I. Every dollar that we are working for, a portion of which goes to the state that they have in their budget to fund these things. And a practical way to think about it, say you're working, you're driving a bus, or you're a nurse and you're tending to patients, or you're opening your small business, or you're working behind a computer, or you're teaching schools, or you're a gym teacher, or any number of the offices and occupations that you and I have. And say you're working just for 1 hour. Well, imagine that for that hour you're working, 16 minutes of that hour is spent for someone else to do something else with your tax dollars. Say you're working for 8 hours that day. Well, you've worked 2 hours for someone else to do something with your own money. So standing on your feet for that long, 20% of that, upwards of 40% of that taken right from underneath you, and that's going to fund some other family's abortion or fund some other child's sex change surgery, oftentimes without their parents actually knowing. That's how practical we have to make the involvement that we need to have and how close to home these issues reach, that we are going to be forced to pay these things. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children as it tears away the rights of parents to make any critical decisions for their children. It says, parents, you have to comply with the aims of the state. What the state decides for your children, you have to comply with it. This new weapon of our Constitution is going to be used to treat you like the victim, like a villain, or treat you like a criminal, saying that parents, if you're not in lockstep with what we want for your child, you are the criminal, you are a villain. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children as it wants to do here what's being done in other states where children are being removed from their parents. CPS coming in and interviewing a child and saying, do you feel unsafe here? Or even if the child says, no, I'm fine, but my parents disagree with my sexuality, or I'm fine, but my parents disagree with my choice of a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or I'm fine, but I'm loved and cared for, but my parents are disagreeing with me wanting to identify as a separate sex. Well, that's enough for CPS to come in and take your children. There are more and more stories of that popping up all across the country and even in our state, which runs completely against where Maryland parents are. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children as folks of religion are in its crosshairs. It says, you nonprofit or you religious church, if you continue to speak out against this, well, you're speaking against a fundamental right, and you no longer have the right to keep your tax-exempt status and continue to speak against us. They will attempt to bully our churches, bully our nonprofit organizations, bully our colleges and our Christian schools into submission by silencing our speech and dangling our nonprofit tax-exempt status over us. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. This amendment is not just dangerous, but it's a direct violation of the first right that God has given us. God has given us this right to life, but that's gone. That right to life is eliminated in the womb, even before the baby has a chance to defend itself. You know, our laws should be there to love and defend Maryland babies and not to install a legal right to destroy them. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. It's not about securing rights. It's about expanding rights in such a fashion that it puts children at risk. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. As state legislatures, when they had the opportunity to put in exemptions for minors, they said, no, we're going to have no age limits, no parental consent. These children can be subject to sterilization and castration without their parents having ever known about it. No information and no consent. Maryland parents love their children, but this amendment wants to destroy children. It's not about health care. It's about exploitation. It's not about patience. It's about profit. It's not about Maryland principles. It's about politicians. These politicians that are bought and sold by Planned Parenthood purses and NARAL, they have as their first mission to destroy life in their womb, and as a close second mission, if that baby escapes the womb, they want to destroy the bodies of children and adolescents and push this radical gender transition agenda. You know, Maryland parents woke up this morning as you do every morning. You'll wake up loving and wanting to protect your children, wanting to keep them away from harm. But this amendment goes in the exact opposite direction. You know, now is the time. Now is the time. In the interest of those that are most innocent among us, our children, now is the time to stand up for the rights of your children. Stand up for the integrity of our Constitution, not to be coerced so that our rights are not stripped away, so that our parental rights are taken away from us. Now is the time to make that stand. And I know that all of that you've heard today may seem at odds with practicality. How can I stand up to these things and keep my job? Or how can I stand up to these things and not be afraid of CPS coming against me? I know how this seems to be at odds with what's practical. How can I stand up to these things and still have political advocacy? Or how can I stand up to these things and still have conversations with my neighbors or my coworkers that may disagree with me? I know how that may seem at odds with rational decision or what's practical for getting along and going on in this world. I can see how all of that can be at odds. But I do want to encourage you that the odds are in your favor. The odds are in your favor because 100% of the time, God shows up and fights for his own. 100% of the time, God shows up and defends the rights of his people who stand by his truth. 100% of the time, the odds are in your favor when you're standing up for righteousness and you are standing up for justice. 100% of the time, God shows up and will not leave his church or his children to defend themselves. Scripture says it this way. Scripture says, I once was young, and now I'm old, but I have never seen the righteous forsaken. I have never seen God ignore his children fighting for truth and fighting for justice. So continue in that fight. Continue to make your voice be heard. Vote no on this amendment to make sure that we keep this thing off of our books, that we keep this agenda out of our homes and away from our families. Our future depends on it. The future of our children depend on it. But remember that you are not alone in this fight. God is on your side. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we have a few questions from the audience, and then we'll also have a few minutes afterwards that if you would like to talk to anybody up here on the panel as well. The first question is going to be for Deborah. If passed, how soon would this amendment go into effect?
I'll have to look at the law and see exactly. Usually they tell you when it'll go into effect. So let me pull that out. I'm sorry about that. Let's see, here it is. So it says approved by the governor and enactment subject to constitutional referendum May 3rd, 2023. So I think it would go in immediately. It would become a part of our Constitution immediately. And the only way that you would get rid of this amendment is if the General Assembly passes another law to say they either need to change the amendment, maybe to exclude minors or add parental consent, or to repeal it altogether. And then that would have to go to referendum and ask the voters again to decide whether they want that to happen. And of course, you would need transparency again, which there was none for this amendment. So that's how difficult it would be to do anything. If this is passed, it's going to be nearly impossible to get rid of it. Laws are different. It's still difficult to repeal laws or change them, but it's much easier than if you put something in the Constitution.
Thank you. The second question I have is for Jonathan. If passed, talk about what the government do to parents if the pushback on a child pursuing to transition.
Yeah, and the story that Kit mentioned is one that we've seen happen all across the country, where you're put at odds with your child's decision, and that allows the state to come in and literally remove your child. The section of the law that applies for the right of government to come in and take away your child is the same section that they use if you're malnourishing your child, or if a child is being physically abused or sexually abused. That same force of government that comes in and investigates and removes a child, that's the same section of law that's animated by a parent having a disagreement with their child here. And in so many states across the country, states that have already passed this, you're seeing parents lose custody of their children literally to the state, where their children become wards of the state, sometimes placed in foster care and adoptive homes. And you think, what kind of home are they going to send my child to? Well, you can already imagine where they will send your children to, what type of homes that they're looking for to place children that are removed from religious parents or removed from houses that simply want to say, no, God created you this way, and we're going to encourage you to continue living your life in a way that reflects the way He created you. So the threat is out there. It's already occurred. And any protections that are there aren't for the parents, certainly not there for the child. They're for the doctors that go in and perform these surgeries. So there's a whole list of protections that protect the doctors. And you ask, why do you have to have this entire section protecting the doctors? And there's a doctor here that can probably speak to this. It's because of the experiments and the medical malpractice that they're doing on children that requires them to have an entire section of law just to protect them. So the threat is real, and it's already occurring here in this country and around the state, where they're coming in and removing children if parents disagree with their lifestyle.
Jonathan, question real quick. Since the law says reproductive freedom but doesn't define it, wouldn't that, isn't like a hysterectomy or a castration, as you mentioned castration, wouldn't that come under that as well?
Yeah, and I know Deborah has spoken to that as well. So even such thing as vasectomies being a fundamental right is how you can interpret it. There is no definition of reproductive health in the Maryland Code, and that's intentional. They want it to be as broad as possible to pull you in and say, well, this just has to do with a woman's right to, so-called right to terminate her pregnancy, but it is all encompassing, from puberty blockers at the start all the way through to castration.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I have a question for Kit. When parents' concerns are invalidated by schools, IEP staff, what is the parents' resources to get the appropriate education for their child? They don't provide the tools for parents who don't have resources to hire an attorney. Where is the justice? Ishmael, can you hear that? Thank you.
So asking if a parent doesn't have the resources such as an IEP?
Yep. Again, I'll read it. When parents' concerns are invalidated by schools, IEP staff, what is the parents' resources to get the appropriate education for their child? They don't provide the tools for parents who don't have resources to hire an attorney.
Well, I would say it starts at the very beginning of when your child starts in school. I always say, be so present in your child's school that you are mistaken for staff. You want to be there the very beginning at open house. You want to look around. You want to see what kinds of paraphernalia the teachers have. You want to see what books they have in their personal library. You want to see what flags they have on their desk, so that you know what kind of person is teaching your child. If you can't get the resources, like for example an IEP, you can go above the teacher, above the principal. Always start with the most local person. So start with your child's teacher if you have a problem with them, then go to the principal, and then if you still can't get what you need, go to the school board. And that's why utilizing the school board is so important, because they are the ones that oversee the entire school system. So you have a right as a parent to make sure your child's needs are met, and it is the law that if your child is suffering from anything that needs an IEP or any 504, then that they are provided with that. So if you can't get it from the teacher or the principal, go straight to the school board.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to add to that as well is that if your child has an IEP and you feel that they're not getting the proper education, there is an IEP advocate that can come to your school, and they will sit with your child to see how they're being taught, and they will give feedback if the appropriate education is given or if changes need to be made. And it's an IEP advocate, so you can ask about that as well. Next question I have is for Blaine. If passed, what will be the effect be on the church teaching?
The effect of the church will never change, in the sense that it'll never change people's position and what they believe. But these things will affect the issues of the church family. When we look at families today in the church and what the church represents and what we teach, in fact, one thing I want to emphasize is this issue is really not a religious issue, but it is a moral issue, whether you believe in God or not. It's a principle that whether you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or you're whatever you believe, it's just going to affect every single person, every family. So we look at the big picture and the corporate setting of the society. We all know that the effect of this decision will affect the future. And as I wanted to emphasize, which is so important, this decision, once it's passed, would almost be impossible to revert back or to change back. That's why it's so important for us to take this matter serious right now. And I can't say it more, is that we need to tell everybody. I wish this place was packed, where every person, every empty seat would be filled with people that are seeing this. So hopefully we'll bring some type of awareness, but it's really up to you to go out and tell your friends and family. If you're a part of a church, tell your pastor and tell everyone, because it's definitely going to affect our community in a negative way if it is passed. And as all these issues that we presented here today, this is really, really happening right now. So we got to stop this.
Thank you. And we have 3 more questions. Next question is for Father Meeks. What is your biggest concern if this amendment passes?
My biggest concern is that, of course, parents' rights are going to be completely abdicated to the state. And I made the comment about Marxists in my presentation. This is a mainstay of Marxist ideology. It's one of the chief tactics that they always use in trying to take over a country, to try to separate children from their parents. They did it so very successfully in the Soviet Union and much of Eastern Europe and in other communist countries. So be aware of that. There is a move afoot for our country, for our society to be taken over by forces that none of us here would appreciate, none of us here would support. So it's important, as all of the speakers have said, that God's people take a stand. You know, we still live in a constitutional republic. We still have the right to vote. We still have the right to exercise and make our opinions known to our lawmakers, and we have both a right and a responsibility to do that. That's why we're encouraging you in the strongest possible terms to vote against this amendment. Health Not Harm has a bunch of lawn signs out there. If you care to, if you're brave enough to take one or two home and put it on your front lawn, it might even spark a little bit of conversation with your neighbors who know nothing about this issue. You know, unfortunately, the powers that be, as has been stated, have been very successful so far in cloaking this thing, in making it kind of a stealth amendment that will be sprung on people on November 5th that they know very little about. Some people will just reflexively vote yes on it because they vote yes on every question that appears on ballot initiatives. Let's not let that happen. Let's be proactive. Let's talk to our friends, our neighbors, our family members, and get this thing defeated.
Thank you, Father. And Deborah, you had a brief comment to make as well?
I want to say that when I was down in Annapolis and testifying against this law to put the amendment on the ballot and other things, is the mantra I kept hearing with this and other things is that people who support this are saying that children have a right to privacy that supersedes a parent's right to know. Yet these same people are saying that random adults in the school system or even a doctor have a right to know private things about your child. Now, it doesn't matter what your education level is or if the education level of the doctor or the teacher or someone else is more than yours. You are the expert on your child. No one can take that from you. You know your child. The doctors, the teachers, they can give you information, they can help you decide what is the best pathway for your child, but you are the expert on your child. A perfect example of that is Dr. Ben Carson, you know, the world-renowned neurosurgeon who also has a brother that is an aeronautical engineer or a rocket scientist. Their mother only had a third-grade education. Yet she was the expert on her children, and she raised two amazing sons. So never forget that, and never feel intimidated by someone simply because they have a few extra letters behind their name.
Thank you. Next question I have is for Ishmael. What would you say to the parent who wants to speak up but worried about offending somebody?
Yeah, that's a very good question because we were raised, you know, especially if we come from good families, we're raised to be polite and kind and, you know, not rock the boat. But I tell you what, you have to always keep in mind this is your child who you are defending. And if you would take a bullet for your child, and I think all of us would, really, then you can be pushy with your parent, with your kids' teachers, and principals and counselors and the school board. And I'll tell you, I so many times was thinking to myself, am I out of line? You know, I mentioned that in my talk. Am I out of line? Am I the one? Am I the jerk here? You know, look, you are not the jerk. They're the jerks. You know, I'm not trying to turn people. But the point is, you know, stand up for yourself. You're not wrong. You know, you're not wrong, and be willing to step on some toes because it's your child's future at stake.
Thank you so much. And I'll ask a last question I have here is, how does this amendment affect homeschools, families? Jonathan, Deborah, does it affect homeschool?
Yeah. So there is no carve out, of course, for how you're raising your child, whether you're sending them to public school or you're sending them to private schools or you're deciding to homeschool your children. Maryland is a state that has laws that you can understand when it comes to homeschooling your children. I think you do have to submit your curriculum and have an overseer at a school sort of chaperone or look over what you're teaching your kid at home, which I think, for one, is a bridge too far. But this amendment wouldn't treat your child at home any differently from the child that's at school or the child that's in private school. What it does do is allow children of any age to have access unlimited to abortion, which is already Maryland law, but is now going to be placed in the Constitution, harder to turn back, but also would allow children of any age to start taking puberty blockers, consult with a doctor, and go through a lifelong, forever changing situation of who they are, of how God created them, and completely eliminate the parents. I'm glad you mentioned homeschool, because I think it is, a strong way of being able to, raise your children and keep them not completely insulated, but protected, guided through making these decisions, especially the decisions of sexuality and health, which are conversations that mothers and fathers should be having with their children, not some other counselor. I think homeschool is an incredible option for parents to have, and I know not every family is able to do that. I think the church can do an incredible job having private schools, encouraging parents to pool resources together so that the ultimate goal of us being the ones that are there in our children's lives, raising them, nurturing them, and upbringing them, ultimately in the word of the Lord, but secondarily for them to be good citizens. I think that relies with the parents. Everything in this amendment, once again, it can't be stated enough, everything in this amendment stands against that primary role, and that's why we should fight against it.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to just mention to everybody here as well is that, if you think about your child, maybe they're in kindergarten, middle school, high school, they're still your baby. We still need to fight for them, and they're at the front lines of a lot of these fights. I encourage you to, tomorrow I want to announce that early voting starts. You heard a lot of messages today. Now, next step is to share it with somebody. Make sure you grab a couple friends and go out and vote. We thank everybody for taking their time to be with us tonight. I encourage you to get to know some of the panel speakers, get involved with their organization, support them if you can, and just share this event. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We'll be out in the lobby if you have some questions. And everybody have a good night. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Tim, can we get one picture of everybody up here? Can you get one picture of everybody? Let's all stand up.
The Reproductive Freedom Amendment creates a new right for all individuals, regardless of age.
Hands off my son.
Hands off my baby brother.
Hands off my daughter.
Hands off my little sister.
Hands off our kids.
Vote no to question 1.